Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of our PBRTV live sessions. To keep voting alive, we've got our live session with Paul Glatzel. This is our episode 4 of our educational series. Today we are looking at Buoyage and also to passage plan, your pilotage. So I'm going to bring Paul in and then we'll get cracking with today's episode. Hey Paul.
Hi, good afternoon Tom.
Thank you for joining us again this afternoon. So we wanted to obviously advance people's knowledge now. We're going to delve a little bit deeper. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about safety tips with and looking at navigation and navionics and various practical tips for the new boater. Today, we're going to sort of tie those things in together, aren't we, with looking at Buoyage and your passage planning.
Absolutely, yeah. We looked at charts and tides, and that's two of the key parts of being able to formulate a plan to go afloat. Buoyage, the things that we see bobbing around in the harbour out there, is the bit that we're going to cover today, and then putting that all back together from a passage plan, pilotage point of view in terms of learning how to plan how to go from A to B.
Yeah, because I guess, is there a legal responsibility to have to do a passage plan? What's the importance of what we're going to be talking today?
Yeah, it's one of those really misunderstood things. And I think one of the things in the UK is we're not legally required for leisure users to have qualifications. And therefore, so people tend to look at it and go, well, there aren't actually any rules relating to us being afloat. But actually there are, where we're covered by a variety of laws as leisure boaters. But also, one thing that came out quite some number of years ago now was that leisure boaters have a legal responsibility to plan a passage when they go to sea under something called SOLAS 5, Safety of Life at Sea, Chapter 5. And that's something that people don't always understand. And we'll come to in the pilotage and the planning session as to quite what that means in terms of what we need to do. But there is a legal obligation to do it.
Yeah, and I suppose we've been talking on previous episodes about the advantages of things like navionics, and there are benefits to it helping you in your knowledge of the local area, and some attributes that are similar to an almanac, with it telling you about tides and local knowledge on marinas, etc. But there are flaws with all of this technology with just auto routing, and I know that when I drive a car and it's just on the GPS mode, quite often previously, if I don't run a GPS, I can always find that place again because you're aware of your surroundings, etc. Whereas if you're just following a TomTom, sometimes you're a little bit oblivious to what's going on. So should we start with the Buoyage, what that actually means, and sort of crack on from there?
Yeah, no, and it is really key. You know, we all use chart plotters, we all use electronic aids to navigation, and that's absolutely the way we all go boating now. But we can't really use those properly unless we understand the underlying component parts of it, the tides, the way that chart's constructed, and Buoyage is therefore a key part of it. So yeah, let's get cracking and have a look at some of the things that we see out there.
Cool. So I'm going to share our first slide. So it will appear on my side of the screen. So we've got a drawing here of a rib making its way through a passage with a port and starboard can. So can you explain to everybody what we're looking at here?
Okay, so what we're seeing is one of the most common things we see out there, which are the lateral marks, the channel markers that show us where the channels actually are. And what you're seeing in that image, which is out of many of the RYA books on the subject, is a vessel, in this case a rib, proceeding up into a port or harbour. So it's good for us to start to think of that way, coming into a port and a harbour, and it gives us a reference, because basically coming into a port or harbour, we've got the reds on the left and the greens on the right. And if you're looking at that image, whether it's something you've seen before or you're new to it, have a look at what you can see that's different about the red and the green. Well, quite obviously colour, but also the shape. So if you look at the red, then it's more can-shaped, it's more square-shaped. Whereas if you look at the green, it's more triangular, it's more conical shaped. So think to yourself why that might actually matter, why that might be beneficial. And sometimes we can't see the colours because maybe the sun is behind those buoys and they're silhouetted, and therefore by being able to see those shapes, we can discern what those buoys actually are. So going into a port or harbour, an estuary, we'd expect to see reds on the left, greens on the right. And that's just basically the setup in certainly not every part of the world, but we're just going to concentrate in other regions that we're interested in.
So for those that couldn't see the little writing on it, is there a particular flashing sequence or anything with the ones that are that have got lights on the top?
Yeah, not all the buoys have lights, and you can see on a chart when a buoy does have a light, insofar as it's got a little sort of purple sort of lozenge against it, and that's indicating it's got a light. And the lateral marks, what you saw on that buoy was that they can flash any sequence except 2+1. So basically a red lateral could flash anything. It could be flash, flash, and a gap, and flash, flash. Or it could be flash, 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 continuous. But it won't be 2+1 because they're to signify another buoy that we're going to come to. I think just something to say though, if you're starting off boating, us as instructors wouldn't really want people to be going out at night because it's a whole different ball game in terms of the skills associated with that. So whilst the bits are on there in terms of the lights, there'd be one to put to one side. But one of the other things you would have seen on there is the representation that you see on a chart, and you'll see for the reds a sort of can shaped with a little R underneath, and for the greens a little G underneath a triangle. So you actually see them represented the same way on the chart. Now with the chart plotters nowadays, quite often they're coloured, quite often it's more obvious which ones are which, but not everything represents it that way.
And obviously, for a new boater, maybe they've never been on the water before, and they're looking at getting training, etc. But they're getting their boat, they're on the water, they're heading out, and they're going to see different sizes and shapes at points. So sometimes you see a big red can, sometimes there are smaller ones, sometimes you see painted posts. Do they mean anything different?
Yes, that's good question. So if we start it and we think of it like many things, follow the money. And basically what you see in terms of its size and its shape is generally a function of how much money is knocking around. So if you take a big port or harbour where there's big ships coming into it and they're paying harbour dues, they're paying fees to come in, and they're obviously large vessels, they're going to want to see big lateral marks. And those big floating reds might be the height of this room, possibly 10, 12 foot wide, so damn big bits of metal. But that obviously costs a lot of money. So you find those big buoys marking the main channel. And they'll mark the main channel for the larger vessels going into a port and harbour. And then you progress beyond that, maybe beyond the commercial port, and you'll start to see smaller floating buoys. So exactly the same shape, exactly the same colours, same sort of light sequences if we were looking at that, but they'd be smaller, maybe knee height, maybe waist height, something like that. And then you progress and there's less money knocking around. Maybe it's a smaller marina or a smaller channel. So you'll have literally a wooden post with maybe a piece of plywood at the top that's shaped to be the shape of that red lateral mark or the green one. And then we don't want to spend the money on the plywood at the top, so we just have the post. And then perhaps there's a little channel going down to my house, and maybe my house has a nice little jetty coming at it, and no one's going to pay to put any buoyage in there. So I go out and I put sticks in at one side. So I get a piece of tree that might be 10 foot long, chop all the bits off it, and I know that when I go into that towards that jetty, that I need to keep these sticks on the left-hand side, and they're called withies. And that's part of the lateral buoyage system. So we see this progression from damn big bits of floating metal, smaller bits of floating metal or plastic, wooden posts with top marks, or wooden posts without top mark painted in the colours, and then withies. So we've got that progression through the lateral buoyage system.
Great. So shall I show the second slide, which puts this in a bit of context with the different routes down this channel? So if I bring this one up.
So what we're about to see, so we're giving it a little bit of context here, but we're also introducing a variation on these lateral buoys. So you can see, let's put ourselves down at the bottom left-hand side of this image, and we're passing between that red and a green, quite normal red and a green, and then we're coming to a fork in the road, as it were. And the main part of the road goes up dead central up towards the 12 o'clock position, but we've got a secondary channel moving off to the right, and then a little bit further off we've got a secondary channel off to the left. And you can see that secondary channel off to the left. We've got post with top marks, ditto the one off to the right. But you'll notice also, let's look at that first turn off to the right. There's a green there just at the corner. And what do you notice that's different about that green? Well, that green has a little red band, and that's called a bird channel mark. So basically, that buoy is acting as a channel marker for the main channel going upwards and the secondary channel going off to the right. So how do I know which one it is? Because what it's showing me is which direction the main channel is. And I've always found the easiest way to actually remember it is if you look at that green and say, what does it most look like? What's it most acting as? Well, it's mainly green. It's big and it's green and it's got a little bit of red. So it's mainly a green. Therefore, it's saying the main channel is by keeping that on your right-hand side. So therefore, the secondary channel, the thing it's doing less of, is being the red. So the lesser channel is off to the right. And you can see that carrying further up the image where we have a red lateral that's acting as that preferred channel mark. You don't see them that often, and as we'll come on to shortly, you quite often actually see in some harbours cardinal marks used instead of preferred channel marks. You see some of the preferred channel marks down in the Solent, and you'll know in life whether you're ever destined to be an instructor, because if you get excited by seeing preferred channel marks and maybe some of the other buoys that we'll come on to, then you've got a lot of potential. If you're a bit geeky, you've got potential to be an instructor.
So when we were talking about flashes earlier, I'll keep the picture up for a second. We've got here flashes red 2+1. So this helps distinguish from the other irregular patterns on other random buoys across any waterway.
Absolutely. So we could say always a preferred channel mark is going to flash 2+1.
Okay, cool. All right. So
whichever colour it's acting.
Where you're talking about cardinal marks, we're going to bring this up in a second, but do you always see them together? You know, where would they normally be if somebody's a new boater and they're out boating at sea?
Yeah, so cardinal marks. Cardinal marks denoting coming from the cardinal points on a compass, northeast, south and west. You don't often see all four of them. I've seen all four of them a few times, and I'm pleased to admit I really get quite excited when I see all four together. You see two together quite often, but generally they're in individually. So two, there's one down, a couple of them down off Portland. We've seen a group of four, I think, around Orkney, and then also just down off sort of southeast of Selsey on the south coast. I've seen some. So you don't often see them, largely because it's cheaper for them to put two buoys than four. But let's just look at what they are. So what a cardinal mark does is it denotes an area of interest. You tend to see on a lot of the images a big danger sign in the middle, but actually technically it's marking an area of interest. And what it's saying is the safe water, where to go that's safe, is to the north, to the east, to the south or to the west. So if we look at that picture you're looking at, look at the top one, that's a north cardinal. And what that's saying is the safe water, where to go, is to the north of that point. And on this image we've got a rock, so you can see what the danger is. But actually, one of the things that we do need to bear in mind with our lateral marks and our cardinals is just because it indicates, in this case, to go to the north, it doesn't mean us in our smaller boats can't go to the south. We're going to have a look at a chart to see why it's there. And if we look at a chart, we can make an educated decision as to where we can and can't go. But going back to the buoys, if you look at the north and you look at all the buoys, what do you notice about them? They're all black and yellow, but they're all slightly different. So if we look at the north one, the one at the top, the black is at the top, the yellow's at the bottom. And also, if you look at the arrows point up. And the arrows are pointing to where the black is. So sometimes you won't be able to see the top marks, but you might be able to see the colours. Sometimes you won't be able to see the colours, but you might be able to see the top marks. So you've got two ways of being able to detect which cardinal that is. And if you add in lights as well, and the flash sequences of lights, that gives you a third method. The east, you'll see the black is at the top and the black is at the bottom, and the yellow's in the middle, and the arrows are like that. And a way that we put it across as an instructor is maybe that looks a little like an Easter egg, the top marks, or you could draw an E round it. So a couple of ways of actually remembering it. The south, it's the opposite of north, you can see, points down, black at the bottom. The west looks like maybe a wine glass, perhaps a waist, maybe a W on its side. And again, the black is at the middle. So the cardinals are pointing you towards an area of safe water, but you can't use a cardinal unless you use a compass, because you won't know where north, east, south and west is. So you're going to have an understanding of the chart and the cardinal and a compass to be able to make use of them.
Great. Well, that wine glass, I've told a number of people before. So,
that's the one people always know.
Yeah. So while we're still looking at this, we've got BYB, BY, YB. So when they're looking at a chart and seeing a cardinal, what do these mean and the you've got a little purple bit there and Q and a couple of different things on the chart. So just help distinguish that on the chart for me. Yeah,
absolutely. So if we look on the chart, well, the BYB is black, yellow, black. So that's from a chart. So you should be able to see the top mark. But actually, it's possible maybe you need glasses and you're struggling to see what the top mark is on that chart. But it may well be you're able to see BYB or BY, and that helps you. So it's giving you two methods on the chart. And then you've got the light sequences, basically the east flashes 3 white flashes, which will be quick or very quick, 1, 2, 3, in a period of 10, 15 seconds, something like that, 5, 10, 15 seconds. You'll see that therefore represented on the chart. Ditto the south. The south isn't 6 flashes, it's 6 plus 1 long. The west is 9, and if you think of it now, if you picked up on this, it's like a clock face, isn't it? Where the east is 3, the south is 6, but plus an extra long one to distinguish it from the others. The west is a 9. The north is a little bit of an anomaly insofar as it's just continuous, flash, 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 it just goes on forever. But you could think of it as 12, then another 12, then another 12, then another 12, but there's never any gap between them. It just flashes continuously. So basically those are telling you on a chart what you're looking at.
And as a power boater, somebody that maybe has a rib or a 30-foot boat, or even much smaller, a 6-meter craft or smaller again, is it advisable to always follow a cardinal mark, or can you sort of go, oh, it's okay, it's for big yachts or commercial shipping? Is it compliant, applicable to the smaller boat sector?
I'm going to give a political answer here, sort of yes and no, really. And you just don't know without looking at the chart. If it's a big boy, you could go on the inside and you could get away with it. Equally, it could be there's just a rock straight inside of that and us on a jet ski could go aground. So you just can't say without looking. Equally, in fairness, you can't say going to let's say it's a north cardinal, you can't say with certainty that you can at any time go to the north of it, because it may well be the depth to the north is only safe if you've actually got a certain amount of tide. So it comes back time and time again to actually doing your homework and actually looking at the chart, looking and understanding what tides is for the time you intend going past, and saying, what is that cardinal trying to do? Is it trying to mark a rock? Is it just trying to join a channel? Is it just trying to push us north of an island? And actually, we've got 2 miles inside of that we could go in our small powerboat. So you need to see what the context is, how it's being used.
And I suppose we'll come on to pilotage and passage planning, but that would come into your homework on when you're planning your route of boating for that day, wouldn't it? So,
absolutely.
Moving on from cardinals, there are another bunch of buoys that you'll see out on the water. So if I'll share this screen, we've got some special markers and various other ones here. So yeah, could you talk us through what we're having a look at here and what people will see other than your normal navigational markers?
Yeah, so basically these other buoys are really useful for us and they tell us different things. So the one top left, we all like to think of it as the Dennis the Menace, the dangerous one. And if you think of it, the colour scheme is like Dennis the Menace's jumper, and that's an isolated danger with 2 balls on the top. They're saying there's something directly underneath this buoy that you need to keep away from. Generally speaking, if you get 50, 100 metres, again, you need to look on the chart to see how significant that danger is. But it's saying just don't get too close. And generally speaking, it's going to be sitting on top of a shallow area or a rock or possibly an old wreck that's a hazard to navigation or something like that. So basically, underneath it's something dangerous. If you give it good space, yeah, you're going to be fine. But you need to understand what that is. And again, you have to look at the chart. Coming slightly to the right of that as you look, you've got the somewhat more sort of pleasant looking white and red, with the white and red vertical stripes and a single ball at the top, and that's a fairway or a safe water mark. And we have to go back in time to really think of how these were really used. And these would mark the target point that ships would come to coming into an estuary or a harbour, and they'd target that point, and that would be at the start of the channel. Or alternatively, outbound, they get to it and that way forced it. They don't really need them as much as they did with electronic nav nowadays. So, for example, we've got one here in Poole, and it sits in the middle of a roundabout next to McDonald's. There is one down the end of the Needles Channel going into the Isle of Wight, but quite often now they don't exist as much as they did, and that's just if they could take it out and save money by not having to look after it, sort of makes sense. Bottom right, the yellow is a special mark, and the specials can be used for anything. So they can be any size, any shape, may or may not have that X, that yellow cross as a top mark. And here in Poole Harbour, it's a great example. We use them for so many things. So we use them to mark an old wreck, sewage outfall pipes, jet ski areas, water ski areas, racing marks, and really importantly, 6 knot limits off beaches and no powerboat zones, potentially no wake zones. So quite often there's a picture on the buoy that might say what it's actually there for, but you have to look at the chart. And if you go down some places in the Med, you find them off the beaches, and they're actually shaped like the lateral marks, and there'll be a run for powerboats to go into the beach, to a water ski area or a jet ski hire area or something like that. And the final ones, anyone know what that is? You don't see those very often. That's a temporary wreck mark. So if a ship goes down somewhere, it tends to be a big ship. Trinity House, who look after the Buoyage in the UK, will send one of their vessels round and place those around the wreck in the hope that other vessels keep clear.
So we're going to tie these things all together now. So we've got our breakdown of all the different buoys. Shall we show the next slide, which then puts this into perspective of going down and navigating a channel?
Absolutely. So the image that you're about to see come up is just a harbour. So it's a pretend harbour. It's an image used in many RYA books. And you can see us at the bottom of the page, and you can see there's an island, and then there's a commercial port at the top. So that gives you your overview. And then we're going to zoom in now on the bottom half of that as if we're coming into that port or harbour. So the next image will just zoom in on that a little bit more.
Okay. Let's go. Stop the screen and then restart on the next slide. So here we go.
Right, so there we are coming into this port or harbour, and we can start to put into context and show how these buoys are used. So there we've got a safe water mark or a fairway buoy marking the target point coming into that port or harbour, and you can see just at the constrained tight entrance we've got a red on the left, and we've got a cardinal mark on the right. Now, it could be a green. There's no reason why it couldn't be a green, but the authority have chose to put a cardinal there, and that might be because perhaps for ships trying to target coming in there, a cardinal might just look a bit more sort of visible and different than a whole line of reds and greens that they can see going up into the harbour. To the left, bottom left, you can see the yellows, the special marks, and a little bit of a route down into the beach. So you've got perhaps a 6 knot zone, maybe a route for powerboats to go into, anchor up, or for jet skis to operate. And then as we come up into the harbour, sort of just underneath the top cardinal there, you can see a red and a green, so a traditional red and green. They're used in the way that we've actually talked about. And then you can see that cardinal. So if we flick on to the next image now.
There we go.
We're now starting to see the top half, and you can see that cardinal now at the bottom is the cardinal was at the top. And basically that's really marking 2 things there. It could be achieving a join in the channel, so it could be used rather than the preferred channel mark. But also a ship, again, lining up. It's a great example here in Poole Harbour. We've got an enormous run of red and greens down the main channel, and there is a cardinal there called Aunt Betty. And I think the reason it's there is it's on a corner, and it's just to break up that run of reds and greens. So that could be how it's used here. You follow up the main channel, more reds and greens, and we've got a cardinal there, a north cardinal to the north of the island. And then it's into that commercial port at the top. To the left, you've got that channel heading off, and you can see posts with top marks and then posts without top marks. And if you come back down to the bottom right-hand side, you can see a little jetty and a beach there. And you can see posts, and then you can see little widdies, little sticks marking the left-hand side of the channel as you go in. So basically, that just gives you a context to how you see these in real life and how they're used. And what I'd love for you to do after this is to go out, pick up a chart, and actually look at how these are used. Somewhere like Poole Harbour, the Solent, St Helier around Jersey, some of the areas around Scotland, around Faslane, got some great setups in terms of the use of buoyage. And have a used on a chart.
Would you recommend also that you quite often see it in Poole quite a lot, where the local boaters may know a little shortcut that they can get away with on a particular tide or something, and you'll see them zip across and ignore the buoyage, especially as a new boater, somebody that maybe doesn't know that local water. It's always advisable to make sure that you're sticking to the route that's been designated.
Yeah, and that comes down to doing your planning. And lots of people follow other people and end up in lots of trouble. And a lot of the time people get away with it. Somewhere that's quite shallow, like Poole Harbour here, quite often people don't get away with it. And I think at your peril, you assume that the person in front of you knows what they're doing. So you have to be sort of independent of thought there and do your own planning just to actually be sure, and don't, like a lemming, sort of like just follow that person, because lots and lots and lots of times I've seen people go and sometimes get away with it, and the boat behind them then maybe have a slightly different track, might be slightly shallower, they might have more draft, and suddenly it goes wrong for them. And that can be expensive, and it just makes boating disappointing and not fun then if you damage your prop. So
last week or the week before, we when we were talking about the navionics, we were also talking about these dangers that are not actually there, that like the mark for a point in Poole Harbour that doesn't actually exist on the chart. So these anomalies that sometimes happen when passage planning. So we're going to now look into those things, aren't we, and make sure that we've got the right data and that we're using our new buoyage knowledge correctly so that we can plan ahead. So shall I share the next slide?
Yeah, that'd be great. If we bring up the overarching one on passage planning. So we accept we've got this legal responsibility to plan a passage when we go to sea, but what there isn't is any definition of what we need to do. It's left to us as boaters to decide. So what is forming a passage? So let's say I might come out of Poole Harbour. All of Poole Harbour is not the sea. It's effectively inland waters. It's only once I go past the entrance that I'm going to sea. And then I'm legally obliged to have a passage plan. But what could that be? That could be I'm going a mile to the right to an anchorage I know really well, and I tell the people on my boat when I go out, the tide's this, this is where we're going, the weather's this. Well, actually, I've done a passage plan. If I'm starting to go further, and there's no set guide on this, but if I'm starting to go further along the coast, well, actually, maybe I should have something written down. And the reality with any of these things is they're only ever going to get tested when it goes wrong, and possibly someone's been hurt, and then someone will turn around and say, what did you do? And what I would recommend is actually doing a physical written passage plan, and then potentially for an area you might go to regularly, just keep it laminated, because very little changes. It's just the tide, the weather changes, and maybe some local factors change, and then you can just update it rather than doing it fresh each time.
One thing we do in powerboat racing is, obviously, a GPS can fail at some point or have a brain fart. So you always write down your passage plan and your coordinates and each of your waypoints and your compass bearing for each one. And at least if something fails, you know roughly where you are. You know the heading that you're supposed to be taking to your next mark, etc. So it's written down, and it's a really handy thing. So obviously not in a racing context, but like you say, having the knowledge of where you're going and doing your homework is even more vital when something then fails on board, which will happen at some point in the life of the boat.
It's an absolute certainty, and in fairness, Tom, what you're suggesting is absolutely spot on in terms of what everybody does. And we've referred to it before, it's that multi-layered integrated plan you're putting together. It's not relying on any one thing. And one of the great things about knowing where you want to go, rather than just religiously sort of looking down at your chart whilst I'm following it, is something's going to go wrong in front of you. You're going to see a lobster pot or not see a lobster pot and wrap your prop around it. And actually, you're not going to see the world go by. So if you know that you're coming out of such and such harbour and your plan is then to head off on 090 degrees, yeah, by all means, run your waypoints, run your routes, but then get your eyes up, head off on 090 and look at the lovely view ahead of you and the lobster pot that you just avoided. So if we bring that image back up again, we can just look at what we're trying to achieve with that. So this is our overarching plan. So top left-hand side, we've got a harbour. Far right-hand side, we've got a harbour. And we want to move between those 2 points. Middle, in the top, we've got another harbour, a port of refuge. And for all of those harbours, we're going to do what's known as a pilotage plan. So pilotage is basically a little plan that we put together when we're in close proximity to land and we can see Buoyage and we can see churches and we can see jetties and all that sort of stuff. So stuff on the chart that we can almost touch and feel. We've then got the bit where we're a little bit away from shore, which I would sort of tend to refer to as an open water plan. Now, for a lot of boaters, if you're not boating through the Solent, you never really get far from shore and everything you're doing is pilotage. But in theory, you've got pilotage, open water, pilotage. If you're new to boating, really everything you do should be pilotage. You shouldn't be going that far away from base because you haven't necessarily got the navigation skills yet to back that up. So what we've got on there is just an illustration of some waypoints, some points we put into our chart plotter. We made a note of what the bearing is between those points, what our heading should be in the boat. And then we've got a secondary route. Maybe we've decided that we can head up to a secondary channel. If it's calm, maybe I like to take that route that comes off at about a 2 o'clock direction from the midpoint and head in down the channel. But actually, if it's a little rougher, I'll carry right onto the right and then head in. So by mapping that out in a little sketch, by putting that on my chart, and then by physically preparing the pilotage plans, I've got that integrated plan to what I'm actually doing.
So can you talk us through what people are seeing in terms of just, new to looking at a chart in this plan where you've got 90 degrees, etc. So this would be the course to steer between each of these waypoints, correct?
Yeah, so basically what we've done is we've looked at a chart and we've scribbled out basically a rough plan, or we could have actually laid this on top of our chart. And we've worked out using plotting tools and the chart what our compass needs to say for us to be heading along that sort of horizontal route from the left-hand side of the screen to the right. And just looking at it from afar here, it's going to be about 090 if we're moving left to right. Due east is about 090. So we will have used a plotting tool to work that out and made a note. And therefore, if you go out and your compass on your boat is not saying 090, then that's got to raise some questions. It might raise a question about the compass, and maybe you might have left something near it that compromises the compass. Or it could be you're going completely the wrong direction, and that's happened. Or it could be in your planning you did something wrong. So it's impossible to say what's wrong, but the fact something might be wrong, it gives you that check and that balance. And then we've got some distances in there. We could calculate some times. Maybe at a certain speed, covering X number of miles, it's going to take us 20 minutes, 30 minutes to cover that distance. And therefore, knowing where those turn points are roughly time-wise, or knowing maybe one of our waypoints, our turn points, is due south of that church you see or that spire you see on the cliff due north of us, that's a verifiable waypoint, so something that you can back up. And it's all about having these lots of different ways that actually back up what you're doing.
And I think also an important thing, obviously testing hundreds of boats with the magazine, the amount of times you can jump on a boat that a builder has put a compass where they think it economically looks nice, but they're not necessarily being swung properly, or they're all over the place. So if you've got a new boat, it's probably best to make sure that your compass is calibrated correctly, like you said. It's a simple thing, but obviously with all the modern technology, we kind of then negate the compass. But when we actually need to, with being a proper skipper, we need to make sure that when we do rely on it, that it's actually showing the true data that we need.
It's a really great point, Tom. And we sort of digress slightly, but there was a really lovely example a few years ago on a course, and there was a chap that came on his VHF course, and we were talking about a situation where there was some extreme weather came through one day in August down here, and the rain was such that he couldn't see beyond the bow of his boat. And he said he knew he was near a beach in an area of danger, and he said, and I turned the boat onto such and such a heading because I knew that's where the Needles was. and I just pottered at 3 knots out in that direction because I knew it took me away from the beach. And he was quite criticising himself, and I said to him, "That's brilliant boating. You knew how to use your compass, you knew roughly what direction something was, and you just chugged off towards deeper water, and you had 15 miles to run, so you had plenty of time." 5 minutes later, the rain had passed, you could see, and there were maydays going off all over the place for people perhaps who hadn't been quite as well thought through in that situation. So your compass, knowing it's correct, knowing that you've not left anything, any ferrous objects or electromagnetic fields around it to cause deviation is really key.
Yeah. So I'm going to show you the next slide, and this goes into a little bit more detail here. So what are we looking at?
So basically, sorry.
No, sorry, a bit of a lag there. So can you talk us through what we're seeing here?
Yeah, so basically now this is the pilotage phase. This is when we're going into a port or harbour, an estuary where we've got buoys, we've got churches, trees around us and so on. And these are all things that we can see on a chart. So whether it's the electronic chart we see or a paper chart, one of the problems with those charts is they have a massive data. And the danger is if we just hold that chart up next to us as we try to come into that port, and we try to process that data through our brain, there's a danger our brain can't process it. If everything's going swimmingly well and it's easy, it will be fine. But the problem is, as soon as something goes slightly amiss, your brain is cannot process everything, and it's trying to read from the chart, and it just struggles to process. So what you've got in front of you is some notes, and those notes are showing, okay, so we're going to come in at the bottom right-hand side of that image, and we're going to come in between a red and a green, and I've just drawn the shapes on and put the numbers on, and then we're going to go up a channel, and it says transit. So a transit is 2 things in line with another, and a classic example of this, I've seen 2 really. One is up the Lymington River. You have some classic transits for the ferries to pass, and they get onto that line, and it means one ferry will go on that line, coming out the other one, and they pass perfectly. Or into some of the locks in Scotland, where if you don't go along that transit, then you're going to be on the rocks, and they have posts up on the hill to do that. So you've got your transits, and then you've got your turn points and the headings you need to be on, and something called a back bearing. So we can use a little hand bearing compass, look out the back of the boat, put it onto, in this case, Purdy's post, and we know that should bear 110 degrees behind us if we're running down the centre of that channel. So basically what we've done is we've distilled the complexity of the chart into a simple sheet of A4. And that simple sheet of A4, we'll just leave it held alongside the chart. So we've still got the chart there, and we've got our chart plotter running as well. And those 3 things working together give us a really good structure for getting into that place that we're a little unfamiliar with.
Would you also add into this, maybe if you wanted to, tidal information and planning your weather, etc.?
Absolutely. So what I would tend to do with these is, let's say I did one there for, let's say this was Poole Harbour for argument's sake, I'd prep one and then I'll tend to laminate it, but have a little section for tide at the time I'm going in and weather, because the reality is most of that won't change every time you go in. So you can actually prep it, laminate it, and even nowadays what I'm tending to do is to do it and keeping them in a folder on an iPad. So you've got a pilotage plan for Lymington, a pilotage plan for going into Bangor, a pilotage plan for, so you can just pull them all up, you've done all your work, and then of course something might change, so you might get a chart out, have a quick look through it, and oh no, it's all fine. So you've done your pre-work before you go in. And that just saves you a huge amount of time. But you're right, that you need to be totally on top of the things that are going to be different every time.
So we see here you've got your yellow posts in line with your transit line coming in. In some marinas, say for example Plymouth, if you're coming into the Bay of Plymouth, you will see 2 white lights near the Plymouth Hoe. When they line up, is this doing the same job as the 2 yellow posts, or is it something different?
Absolutely. So they're called leading lights, and leading lights are just the nighttime version of the transit. So it's exactly the same. Plymouth's got some fabulous transits with different colours. They've even got some blue lights in there as well that you line up. So they're doing exactly the same thing. And again, I mentioned Lymington River. When you're at the bottom of the Lymington River, it's got 2 red lights you line up, and then you turn onto another transit and then onto another. And so transits are really good because The beauty of them is if we're steering a course on our compass on our boat, then I could be going along and the tide could be coming here and it pushes me off. But if I'm steering to those 2 posts and I hold on that, keeping those 2 posts in line, then I must be on that line going in. So transits negate the effect of wind or tide. Equally, a back bearing, so holding your compass, your little hand bearing compass, looking behind me, lining it up with a buoy and saying, if that bears 180, then I am on the right track, is the same idea as a transit, but just using a single post, but knowing what the bearing should be to it as well.
Great. Well, it's been really useful to have a little look into the correct way of making a passage plan, your pilotage, looking at the different buoys. People may have just seen red and green cans and not had any idea about the cardinal marks, special markers, etc. So it's been good to refresh our memory on what these things are and how they also look on a chart. Next week, we're going to be using our VHF and looking a little bit deeper into our radio communications. We've mentioned it as part of our safety kit and our tiered approach in previous weeks. And then we're going to be going on to coal regs. So can you just give us a little brief cap on why these things are important and why we should be kind of considering them as a new boater?
Yeah, as you rightly say, Tom, we've looked at safety kits, so why dig a little deeper on VHF? Because it's that box that seems to have, it makes a little bit of noise, it makes some beeps from time to time, and actually, how are we going to use how are we going to use it most effectively? So are there any hints, tips, tricks we can actually use to make the most of that piece of kit that sits there possibly quite idle most of the time, but it's a clever piece of kit. So let's actually just look at some of the key things about VHF. And then coal regs, collision regulations, not crashing into stuff, basically. There's no great point in going out there and doing a lovely passage plan if we do a sort of dodge 'em cars trip into the harbour. So we need to know what the rules are. And I think people are sort of getting the feel that actually maybe there are more rules surrounding all this boating than I thought. And they're not hugely onerous, but we need to be aware of what the responsibilities are on us. So we'll have a look at those in the coal reg session. And sort of like just flesh out some of the ideas and the things we need to know.
Yeah, we want it to be a fun experience on the water. We don't want this to appear as a massive daunting exercise. By breaking these things down to little bite-sized portions, hopefully it can make it a little bit more digestible for people to take in and to understand. And obviously, if they're wanting to advance that knowledge further, they can go on a variety of RYA courses like we've touched on previously in previous episodes, to widen that knowledge, to make sure that they're boating safely but enjoying it with their families.
Absolutely.
So a little shout out to Mel, who is a part of the Osprey safety team. Those that don't know the Osprey safety team, they've just commented on our feed. They travel around the world operating a fantastic marine safety team, not just for marine motorsport and sailing and powerboat racing, but lots of different things. It's a very small organisation that's been going for a long time, and they've looked after me and many other people while we've been out having fun on the water. So big shout out to you guys. To everybody that's been watching, thank you again for joining us for episode 4. And Paul, thank you for joining us again. If you haven't already seen, we are giving away our free digital subscription to Powerboat and RIB Magazine, making sure that you don't need to go to a newsagent while under lockdown. So stay safe, jump onto our website, you can apply there. You can get all of our back catalogue magazines, but also the next 12 months also. Hope you enjoyed another series of our PBRTV live sessions. Next week, obviously, like we've said, Paul will be joining us again to go through the VHF and then further on into coal regs in the following. But we also have Simrad joining us as well to look through the latest kit from Simrad, and we will be going into benefits of radar and using their passage planning built into their technology as well. So I'm sure, Paul, we need to get a bit of kit over to you to go and try out.
Absolutely.
Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. Enjoy the rest of your evening and tune in next week.